This episode is sponsored by 1RPM. Hello, and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Liza Levy, the president of Salt Lick Incubator. Liza has spent 15 years working at record labels including Rounder Records, Concord, and Universal Music Group, both in marketing and streaming. Artist campaign highlights include Alison Krauss, Steve Martin, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Lil Wayne, the Motown Catalog, Janet Jackson, and many others. She now runs a nonprofit that supports emerging artists through grants, the Salt Lick Session Series, writing camps, retreats, mentorship, and community building. So, Liza, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you on the podcast. How's your week been?
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Yeah, excited to chat.
Me too. Well, with that, are you ready for your first question?
Let's do it.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give her on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give her from a business perspective?
Yeah, oddly, I think the advice would be the same for both. Like show up physically, be of service, and make friends. I think both in my personal life and professional life, I could have heard that earlier. I think I was, on the professional side, so busy trying to stack my resume with internships that I was showing up for like one day a week at these three different internships at the same time. And I wasn't really creating, lasting, meaningful relationships with anyone. It was just on paper, and it's really, the people, the humans that are going to change your world and help you with opportunities. But I was like weird and awkward and wanted to avoid the social piece of it. On the personal side, I ended up like joining an a cappella group in college, which ended up being my best friends and also ended up, allowing me to do my career because I had friends all over the country. I could crash on anyone's couches, even when there wasn't budget for me to be places, I could be there because I had, buddies everywhere. And again, that allowed me to really show up places, make relationships, and be of service.
What advice would you give for people that are kind of realizing that about themselves and trying to put themselves out there and make those connections, like in the business and in the industry side of things? What did you focus on when you made that shift?
I think rather than thinking about like, oh, this is what I need this person to do for me, and I have to go ask, or I have to make this cold call, or I have to DM someone. I mean, that was before DMing, but I think thinking about what they might need and how you could, yeah, be of service and help them. So it's easy to contact a band and say like, hey, saw you're coming to Boston. Could I put up some posters on my college campus, like about your show? I'm such a fan. That's such an easier ask than like, hey, I'm looking for an internship or I'm trying to get experience. Could you help me? Could you hire me? So I guess just sort of like flipping that narrative in terms of like, how can I help them?
That's a great point. So before we move on to the next question, can you share a little bit about what led you to create Salt Lick Incubator and what the nonprofit offers?
Sure. So I spent about 15 years working at record labels, both, indie and major, as you know, and then had this opportunity to work at Berklee College of Music doing artist development and industry relations. And I loved it. I loved working with the students. They were so hungry and creative, like bold, willing to take risks and not scared of the outcomes. And it really inspired me. But it was tough because, I had like thousands of undergrads and also worked with the alumni community, which is like 70,000. And so I sort of felt like I wasn't able to super serve everyone at the same time. And at that point, Roger Brown, who was the president of the school, beloved leader, started seeing what I was doing with some of the artists and the students. And he was like, hey, how could you do more of that? Like, would you be able to do more of that if you had resources and it was a little more focused? And I was like, wait, what do you mean resources? And he was like, well, what if there was, funding to help these emerging artists with their projects? And I said, that sounded awesome. And this was his whole brainchild, really. So he said, well, let's go do this thing. Let's start this nonprofit. Let's help artists. He sort of felt like when they were in school or living at home, they were really supported in this bubble. And then he saw really talented people go out into the world and sort of like flounder, people that he thought would be totally successful the first few years. They just didn't know where to start, or they got into exploitative relationships. So he was like, how can we create a safe space in a community to help artists continue that growth? So that's sort of the thought behind Salt Lick Incubator.
That's really cool. Where does the name come from? Is there a fun story behind that or just random?
Roger is from Georgia, and his father grew up on a farm, and a salt lick is where all the animals converge to get nourished before they go off on their day. So it's sort of like this little meeting point of, yeah, let's be together and get fed, but we're all our own thing. We're all going to do our own thing. We're not trying to tell anyone, who to be or what to do. So that's the idea. But
That's a great icebreaker. So if you're ever in a social situation again, there you go.
no, I'm going to take that.
All right, next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
I think the power is in the artists, and no one bats 1,000, right? The rules change every day. You know it based on the roles that you've held, and you're dealing with social, and even like best practices on social change daily. And I think, yeah, the playing field changes every day. There isn't a playbook for breaking an emerging artist, and there isn't a 1-to-1 ratio of, if you do this, this will be the outcome. Someone can't hand you a fan base. Sure, they can put you, in front of an audience, but they can't guarantee that that audience will be converted into lifelong fans, giving you a sustainable career. And I was listening to, Ari's Take, the New Music Business podcast, and he cited that, if a major label signs like 25 things a year, 25 projects a year, probably 2 of them will be profitable and the rest won't. And if that's the major label, they have all of the funds and all of amazing staff like yourself and all of the resources to do it, and they still don't bat 1,000. I think that's sort of a nice equalizer, in the music industry, that no one really knows how to knock it out of the park every time, so that everyone has a shot, because we're all learning daily.
100%. What would you tell an artist? They're just super discouraged. What's kind of like the first thing that you tell them?
I sort of like to ask about the people, on the positive side. Who are the people that have connected with your music in life, whether it's live performances or on social or, on the streaming side of thing? Like, what, again, flip that narrative to like, who are these people? Where are they hanging out? What else do they listen to? What do they like to wear? What fashion are they interested in? What TV shows do they watch? And I think that starts to help create the idea of the culture of your fan, and the culture that you're trying to, accommodate and elevate. And we actually had on our grant application about a fan base, who is your fan? Well, there was this answer that just, I always come back to. It says, people who are into what I'm into, dancing but don't know any good moves. They probably drink coffee and watch documentaries in between episodes of some nostalgic cartoon that they've seen 1,000 times. Girls and non-binary people that go to craft fairs and flea markets and can't afford legit furniture, so they reupholster their own from thrift stores and garbage picking. The ones that won't be fooled into liking what's popular, but still listen to Lorde and Britney. They love French New Wave, but they hate subtitles, that kind of stuff. And I think if you can dive into that, into who's connecting, it will start to help give you a path of, okay, then this is how I need to talk to those people, and this is how I need to reach out, and this is where I can find them.
That's such a good response. That person might have a psychology degree. Final question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So what is that question, and what would be your answer?
I guess about mentorship and leadership. I think there's a misconception that leaders have to be the loudest people in the room. And I had this amazing mentor who gave me my career. To this day, I don't know why. I wasn't qualified, but gave me a shot. He was the president of Rounder Records. His name was John Verrant. And I'll never forget this. Our first time going to this award show, it was my job to arrange the tickets, and I made sure to secure him the best seats, and I'd put all the legwork in, and the whole team went. Our intern went. We had some standing room in the back, and he gave his seat to our intern, and he stood in the back. And I just thought that was like the coolest thing, and who I wanted to be. And I remember too, when he spoke, if someone asked him a question, he always had these long silences. And, like I said, I was a weird kid. Like, I was so awkward, and I'd always try to fill those silences, just babble. But then as I watched him work, I realized it was a compliment to the person who asked the question, because he wasn't coming with some stock answer or the easiest possible conclusion. He was really thinking about it, and weighing the options and respecting the question. And I thought that was pretty cool too. And it reminded me of, I have a friend, Anna Frick. She's an incredible mastering engineer, works a lot with the Recording Academy. And she says in the academy, you're taught to always be training your replacement and bringing up the next generation. And I just love that, in the music industry, as music industry professionals, it can get competitive. We know what layoffs are like. We know they happen every year and it's brutal. But I think that, real leaders know that all ships rise.
It's about time we close out tonight's episode. But Liza, thanks again for joining me. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
So much fun to be here. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I'm such a fan of the podcast. So appreciate being on.
To everybody listening, hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes of asking 3 powerful questions. See you next time. And just one final reminder, this episode is sponsored by 1RPM.